stuttering that she ran out of divine power because she summoned so many people. At this moment, Xiongwu snaps, yelling at her and asking if she is joking. He says he will turn her into goddess soup. Luckily, his companion held him back. Gaia steps back and thinks she still can't believe how strong Xiongwu has become. He doesn't even seem human. She says to let it go because she will give everyone there a reward for their great achievement. She asks what they wish for. The orc says he wants to go to the next battlefield as soon as possible, preferably one where there is a good reason for the war. The girl says she doesn't want anything because she already got what she wanted since she started adventuring with her companions. Xiongwu squeezes her and asks if she isn't ashamed to say these things. She asks why she would be ashamed. The archer says he wants to be able to travel to any dimension and take his weapons. Gaia says it is possible to travel between dimensions, but taking weapons is more difficult. She asks the reason. He yells that it's the revolution, a revolution dedicated to the poor and oppressed. He will spread the flames of the revolution across all dimensions, arrows, and fire for the opposition. Xiongwu agrees with him. The archer thanks the protagonist. Gaia agrees and soon asks what Xiongwu wants. He thinks for a moment and realizes he already has so much money that he has nowhere to store it. He is also not someone who wants to rule over others. Currently, he is at level 255, already able to travel between dimensions and conquer any world he wants. Xiongwu tries to think about what he wants now and ends up remembering a good moment in his life. When he was walking down the street, he was tired and starving until he saw something, a restaurant poster. Xiongwu went to the restaurant and sat at a table. A guy next to him ordered something to eat, and the protagonist ordered the same thing. A little while later, a really good meal arrived. Xiongwu, seeing that, became very happy as he was finally going to eat something good and even cried with emotion. When he took a bite of the food, Gaia started to annoy him, asking what he was thinking about so much. He holds her finger and says he was remembering a wonderful moment, the moment she threw him into this world without a single potion. Gaia gets embarrassed by this, but at that moment, Xiongwu decides what he wants. He wants to return to his hometown and run a restaurant. Everyone is in disbelief at this. Gaia asks if that's really what he wants. Xiongwu responds that he is thinking about taking food from there to his hometown. The archer finds it strange that he wants to take food from there. Xiongwu says that Earth's food is common there. Therefore, he wants to bring food from this place to be innovative. The archer thinks the protagonist is crazy, the orc can't believe it, and the girl starts praying for the protagonist. Gaia points out that the food there is very bad, as it even holds the title of the worst food in all dimensions. Xiongwu grabs his sword and sticks it in the ground. He says, "That's it." Gaia runs away in fear. But the protagonist, happy, asks if it wouldn't be unfair for him to be the only one to enjoy the culinary surprises of this world. Seoul, a city of wealth and peace where the lights stay on until dawn. Strange noises start to be heard. Suddenly, a gigantic monster steps on the post as if it were nothing. At that moment, portals and monsters began to appear everywhere. The name Seoul disappeared without a trace. The city began to be completely taken over by monsters, destroying everything and everyone around. A man is watching everything from the top of a building. This was the disaster zone. Sector A. The man was irritated seeing all that. Another person arrives and asks how one of the top 100 high-level hunters. The girl asks the guy to protect his dignity as first order. This man is called Mr. Beck Kankiuk. His code name is Superstar. He looks down and says there's no way and asks if he needs to close that too. The girl replies that no, there was no need to close those low-ranking portals. He will close them soon. Beck gets irritated and says he's tired of doing overtime and asks the woman if she knows what's going on. She says that this place was an S-rank danger area, nothing special. Until something changed. 4 days ago, the number of monsters increased absurdly. Beck agrees and points to the monsters, asking her to look. The monsters were moving as if they were being hunted by a wild beast. The girl says that the second-order men thought the same, and that's why they think the boss could arrive at any moment. She tries to take Beck's cigarette, asking him not to smoke, but he dodges saving his cigarette. But suddenly, it starts to rain, and his cigarette goes out. He looks at the sky and says, "This is getting very annoying." He turns and starts to go inside, saying that if that's really what the second order said, a raid should happen soon. He asks to let them know he will be taking a 10-day vacation. The woman asks how he would take a 10-day vacation just like that, and where he was going so late at night. He just says he's not in the mood today. He starts laughing and says he would get rid of all the fatigue from working late. She keeps looking at him, thinking he started again. The rain continued. Beck was walking around and shouts that he chose that place. He was pointing to a house with the lights on. He starts to think that the fatigue of doing overtime, the pressure of the fights, and the empty stomach were killing him. His stress was at its limit. He starts to enter and thinks that if the food is bad, they better be prepared to close. And if the food is good, then he would scold them for making him eat day and night. He reaches for the door to enter, but he sees a sign saying they are closed. He gets irritated, asking how they are already closed. He keeps thinking that he has really bad luck. He grabs the sign, saying he can't believe a simple sign is stopping him. Beck breaks the sign and says he is the first order, the superstar. This is ridiculous. He kicks the door, shouting. The place was clean and empty. Someone is saying they haven't signed a contract with a supplier yet and also need to buy the missing tools. This person is the protagonist, making a list to organize his restaurant. He thinks it's been about 4 days since he returned to Earth. He says it's not that urgent, so it might take some time. He goes to his movie box and chooses one, saying that this is life, a movie and a good cup of coffee. And it was right at that moment that Beck arrived, kicking the door hard. Beck looks around, saying that the place is empty apparently. There were no customers today. The protagonist remains silent for a moment and turns angrily, saying it's empty because he hasn't officially opened yet. Beck sits at the edge of the table and says he doesn't care and asks the protagonist to prepare something good for him. Sung-woo looks at him, thinking that this guy ruined his movie and still talks to him like that. Clearly, this bastard was looking for trouble. However, the protagonist looks at him more closely and notices something different. Beck notices that Sung-woo is looking at him and yells, asking what the protagonist is staring at. Sung-woo says it's nothing much, but he keeps looking and realizes that Beck has such frail and thin arms, legs that would break with a kick, eyes and a head that wouldn't recognize a sign that says closed. Sung-woo feels sorry for Beck, thinking that he must have gone a long time without eating properly. He has no manners or awareness of things. The protagonist thinks Beck might be mentally ill. Beck gets irritated, stands up, bangs on the table and yells why the protagonist is looking at him like that. Beck asks if the protagonist can't see his coat as he is from the first order. While Beck is yelling, Sung-woo simply leaves him talking to himself and goes to the fridge to see what the dish of the day is. Beck gets furious about this. He sits down and says the protagonist is rude and orders him to bring something to eat quickly. He looks at some ingredients and thinks they might be too strong, but then he sees a beautiful piece of meat and thinks he will do Beck a great favor by serving something very expensive. He slams the meat onto the table with force. This shoulder meat, which lies between the neck and wings of a red dragon, if compared, might look like pork. He grabs a knife and, with a single cut, slices a piece of the meat. Red dragon meat contains the spirit of flames. Because of this, it has a very strong fire flavor, and if marinated with juice, it will have a very rich taste. Today's choice is grape juice. He starts drizzling the meat with grape juice. Even though the taste of the meat alone isn't bad, he needs to make a good impression on the first customer. He begins to cook and flambe the meat. Sung-woo smiles with happiness, as cooking was something fun. Beck watches the protagonist cooking and is astonished by what he hears. Beck asks the protagonist if he heard wrong, as he clearly heard the meat scream. Beck asks once more if the meat just screamed. Sung-woo says it is probably his imagination. After preparing everything, the protagonist plates the dish and serves it to Beck. The dish was beautiful. Beck looks at the food, analyzing it. Then he looks at the protagonist, thinking that he hates to admit it, but this guy is incredible. Beck tells the protagonist that he was quite kind in flambeing the meat and that his little show wasn't bad either. Sung-woo doesn't quite understand and asks if Beck is complimenting him. Beck drops the conversation and prepares to eat, as the smell of the meat was great and the meat sear is incredible. Beck gets excited, thinking this is good, but before eating, he asks the protagonist what the name of that dish is. Sung-woo says the name is Bife Reyes. Beck says he has never heard of this dish, but he will try it. He tries to cut the meat but can't. He keeps trying to cut the meat using all his strength. He starts to get irritated and yells, trying to cut it in every possible way. He stops trying, sweating and tired, and says that the steak is impossible to cut. Sungwoo is perplexed and says he will cut the meat for him. As he takes the plate, he thinks that this weakling couldn't cut the meat. Kale Reyes is in a cave. The protagonist was looking for his ingredients and finally finds a strong opponent, the ancient red dragon Kale Reyes. For 1,800 years, he was the elder of the red dragons and the right hand of the Demon King. The two meet in the cave. The dragon tries to attack the protagonist, but the protagonist also starts attacking. In this fight, Sungwoo had to work hard to defeat that dragon. Back at the restaurant, the protagonist is cutting the meat with extreme ease. Beck says he doesn't know and asks if the knife would be able to cut the meat, but as soon as he looks to the side, he sees the protagonist cutting the meat. Sungwoo smiles and tells Beck that he must be very tired so he couldn't cut it. Beck agrees, saying that was probably it, but he will taste it anyway. He takes a piece and puts it in his mouth. Immediately, he feels something strange. He lowers his head, trembling, and starts to scream as fire comes out of his mouth. He covers his mouth and says that there was fire coming out of his mouth and that the taste is terrible. The protagonist sighs and says that's great because he did everything to ensure it tasted bad. Beck asks why. Sungwoo bangs on the table, shouting that the food he eats is for survival and strength. That's what makes a dish terrible. Beck is still struggling with the meat and tries to vomit but can't. He wonders why he can't vomit this cursed meat. He thinks he should keep chewing, but it was too hot. The only option he has now is to swallow the meat. As soon as he swallows the meat, he feels something very different in his body. He starts to get dizzy and falls hard to the floor. The protagonist looks at him while Beck thinks that the taste was really bad. An hour later, Beck wakes up startled and screaming. Sungwoo is sitting on the couch, yawning out of boredom. Beck gets up angrily and says that after the protagonist tried to kill him with that food, he went to sleep. Beck tries to kick the protagonist's face, but Sungwoo catches his kick with just one hand without any effort. Beck realizes something is wrong. Sungwoo sighs and asks if that's all Beck has after eating the dish he made. Sungwoo says it seems that Beck is extremely weak. The protagonist explains that it was a 3-star meat, Kill Rio's steak. The dish provided vitality +2, fire resistance +3, strength +3, and the draconic ability. Beck asks who the protagonist is calling weak and if it's him. Sungwoo smiles and says yes, flicking Beck's foot and throwing him hard against the wall. Beck comes back angry and yells at the protagonist, asking if he really thinks he is weak, and charges at the protagonist again. Beck shouts that he is from the First Order and begins to release his power. However, with great speed, the protagonist enters Beck's opening and flicks his forehead, throwing him away again. While Beck is on the ground, Sungwoo says that if he is irritated, he can try hitting him again, but he is going to sleep now. Before sleeping, Sungwoo takes his phone and wonders what the First Order is for Beck to be so irritated. As soon as the protagonist searches, he sees that the First Order is a group of the world's 100 strongest hunters. Sungwoo is extremely shocked to learn that this weak guy is one of the 100 strongest in the world. Sungwoo says that if the hunters are this weak, Earth is totally screwed. However, he wasn't in the mood to get involved with this. Suddenly, he has an idea and starts looking at Beck, unconscious on the floor. Due to the sudden appearance of the portals, a new job was created to fight against the increasing number of monsters, Hunter. This is the name of those who fight against monsters to protect humanity and the entire world. The 100 strongest hunters in the world received the title of the First Order. In the protagonist's restaurant, Beck wakes up and bows, shouting that he is very sorry. Sungwoo says that Beck is kneeling just because he is weaker. The protagonist looks at him angrily and asks if he would go around doing the same thing in other restaurants. Beck smiles. The protagonist takes his delicious coffee and says, "It's all right because it looks a lot like a video he saw before." Sungwoo says they call it Blu-ray nowadays. Beck observes how the protagonist behaves and speaks, thinking that there's no doubt, this guy is definitely not from here. Looking at the protagonist, he realizes that the power he has is something scary to the point of being able to kill him at any moment without effort. Sungwoo places his mug on the table and says he has made a decision. He looks at Beck and says he will turn him into a new person. Beck is a little confused by this and asks what the protagonist is talking about. Sungwoo says that Beck is a member of the First Order and needs to get stronger to protect the planet. Beck is left speechless. The protagonist explains that educating means passing on skills and knowledge, guiding someone on the right path, and also teaching how to become a good person. That's why he chose to educate him. Beck asks what would happen if he refused. Sungwoo begins to release some of his power. Beck feels all that pressure and screams that he is under the care of the best teacher in the world. The protagonist says, "That's great," and starts explaining that first, he will impart some knowledge about humans, people, the feeling of loving someone, and the feeling of pity. An example is feeling bad for someone. You start to pity that person. Beck starts to get irritated, thinking that this guy wouldn't shut up. When he finishes saying all these words, enough time will have passed to build a 14-story building. Beck interrupts Sungwoo and asks if his job was philosophy. The protagonist says he was a high school teacher and agrees with Beck, saying that his intention was good. He claps and congratulates Beck, saying he needs to learn the importance and value of food. Beck shouts, asking if Sungwoo calls that food, because anyone knows that is a chemical weapon. Sungwoo gets irritated and asks if Beck should really talk like that about food that someone spent time preparing. Is that the kind of attitude a person should have? Beck shouts that he already understood and asks the protagonist to stop. Sungwoo says that Koreans shouldn't waste food. Beck holds the plate in his hand and asks if the protagonist is saying he should eat all that. Sungwoo says yes. Beck turns pale with fear. He starts crying, shouting that he doesn't want to and can't eat that. The protagonist asks him to stay calm, as he will get used to it. Beck tries to throw the food on the floor, saying he won't eat it because it's not food. The protagonist holds him and says he can't say that in front of the person who prepared the food. Beck continues to resist, saying he can't do that. Sungwoo keeps saying that he can. The protagonist grabs the plate of food and shoves it into Beck's mouth all at once. Beck eats the food by force and faints again. Sungwoo grabs Beck by the legs and says that when he wakes up, he will probably vomit, cry, and make a mess again. The protagonist starts dragging him around the house, saying he can't let that happen. He has to ensure that Beck will digest everything, as he doesn't want to see that planet in ruins. That's why everyone needs to get stronger. Meanwhile, at Isaac's headquarters, someone was growing impatient at their desk. The woman from earlier mentioned that it had been 2 days since they lost contact with Beck. A man, holding his knife, asked if that was why he had been called there. This man is the leader of the Second Order support group. His name is O'Keefe. The woman, exhausted, lays her head on the desk and says that Beck couldn't have been kidnapped, investigated, or arrested. O'Keefe agrees, saying that no one from the First Order would be weak enough to be kidnapped or beaten by anyone. Furthermore, he notes that Beck might be hiding after messing up so many times, or he could even be with some woman. The girl, concerned, mentions that they only have 1 day left to prepare to face the boss. At this point, it's becoming an emergency. O'Keefe also gets a bit annoyed with the situation. He starts leaving the room, saying he would go find that irresponsible kid. At night, he begins searching for Beck around the city. Suddenly, he stops walking, and comments that if he didn't have this ability to find problematic people like Beck, his life would be much easier. He crouches down, closes his eyes, and begins to concentrate as much as possible. Suddenly, he notices something and stands up, saying he finally found Beck. Without thinking twice, he heads to the protagonist's restaurant. As soon as O'Keefe reaches the restaurant door, he looks at the place and wonders what Beck was doing there for 2 whole days. He tries to open the door, but it's locked. So, he takes out a lockpick and thinks it will be easy to open the door. He starts working on it and quickly succeeds. He takes a good look around and enters, thinking that Beck must be in the basement. As he surveys the place, someone appears behind him. The moment O'Keefe notices, he turns around to see who it is. Songwoo looks at him and asks if he knows what the word intruder means. O'Keefe is startled, wondering how, but the protagonist smiles and says that whatever he does now will be in self-defense. Meanwhile, in the basement, Beck was working hard. He puts the pickaxe down, takes a deep breath, and says he was going to die this way. Suddenly, someone arrives. He looks up and recognizes the person. As soon as Beck sees O'Keefe, He says he was expecting this, as he always believed in him. Beck, all happy, shouts, asking where the exit is, but O'Keefe walks past him without saying anything. Beck looks back and sees that O'Keefe was also picking up a pickaxe. O'Keefe says he was captured and there was no way they could get out of there. Beck looks at him with a sad expression, knowing he would have to keep working there. With little choice, the two grab their pickaxes and start working. After a while, they get tired and sit down. O'Keefe asks what Beck was doing. Beck says it's obvious, they were expanding the basement. O'Keefe shouts, saying he was being sarcastic, and asks why Beck had to provoke a monster like the protagonist. O'Keefe collapses on the ground, crying. Beck says he didn't imagine the protagonist was that strong, as he didn't seem so powerful. He sits next to O'Keefe and asks if, when he used his ability, he could see how strong the protagonist was, because it was like that with Hakan. O'Keefe responds that yes, Hakan is from the First Order, rank 6, a returned warrior. He stands up and says that, compared to him, at level 85, Hakan doesn't even come close. Beck comments that he really is very strong and asks if they would keep working without rest. O'Keefe picks up his pickaxe and says that instead of resting, he would kill the person who angered that monster, aiming the pickaxe at Beck. He presses the pickaxe against Beck's head. But Beck grabs it and says to O'Keefe, that's why he's doing most of the work, as an apology. O'Keefe, annoyed, crouches down and tells Beck to shut up. Beck says that, in any case, this is not good, because the boss will show up soon, and if they don't get out of there, it could be bad. O'Keefe agrees, saying it would really be bad if that happened, as they were the best hunters in Sector A. Suddenly, Beck's stomach growls, and O'Keefe stares at him. Beck, embarrassed, asks O'Keefe not to look at him like that since they had been working hard for quite some time. O'Keefe sighs and says they needed to get out of there. He was going to apologize to Sungwoo. Beck asks if the protagonist would really let them leave so easily. O'Keefe says that if they explain the situation to him, maybe he will, and that it's strange, but Sungwoo gives off an aura of justice. As soon as they speak with the protagonist, he simply lets them go. O'Keefe lowers his head and thanks him. Beck, joking, asks if this is for real. Sungwoo asks if his name is O'Keefe, and says that he'll stop speaking formally now. O'Keefe replies that he doesn't need to speak formally with him, and asks how the protagonist knew his name. Sungwoo shows his phone, and says he just looked it up on Google. The two are shocked by this. The protagonist puts on his apron and says he was being rude, asking them not to leave yet, because even though the restaurant is still closed, it would be impolite of him to let them go without eating anything, so he'll cook for them. Beck goes crazy at this and bangs on the table, shouting that he doesn't want it because the taste is awful. Sungwoo says he already knew Beck would say that, so he has the option to choose between something awful or something good. Beck asks what kind of idiot would choose something awful. Of course, he wants something good. The protagonist says he'll make salmon for him because he still has some left. O'Keefe stands still, wondering if they really had a choice. He raises his hand to order but stops, and questions whether the protagonist would really let them choose. He thinks that this isn't normal, it's very suspicious. After pondering a bit, he calls out to the protagonist and says he wants an awful dish. Sungwoo is pleased with the choice and comments that finally someone wanted to try it. He opens his fridge and starts preparing the food. He cuts the meat, grabs the sauce, pours it over, and begins chopping the rest of the ingredients. As he cooks, the two watch him. O'Keefe comments that the protagonist is really amazing at cooking. Beck asks O'Keefe if he was stupid for ordering the awful dish. O'Keefe replies that he's wondering the same thing because it looks really good. Beck says that now that he thinks about it, it's really strange because it usually takes 5 to 10 minutes to get rid of the fish smell. O'Keefe explains that Beck probably doesn't notice, but the protagonist is using salt and cooking wine at the same time. Using this technique, the fish smell disappears in an instant, almost like a magic trick. Once the fish is well seasoned, Sungwoo grabs a pan, places the fish in it, and covers it with a lid. He says the first part is done, now they just have to wait, and when it's almost ready, he'll do the rest. While they wait, the protagonist turns to O'Keefe and asks if his heart or liver is weak or if he has any kind of problem. O'Keefe replies that he does, a little, placing his hand on his stomach and saying they're a bit sensitive. Sungwoo sighs and says that unfortunately, he can't give him the regular war dish. Beck starts laughing and comments that O'Keefe can't last 5 minutes in a fight without getting winded. Sungwoo says that in that case, he'll need to make some medicinal food. He goes to his pots, grabs one, and starts preparing another dish. Beck pouts, saying he was hoping the protagonist would make something scary, but he's making something quite normal. He laughs and tells O'Keefe that he's lucky because it looks like he'll get something tasteless. While the two chat, the protagonist keeps cooking, happy as can be. He checks the fish and says, "It's done." He takes the fish out of the pan and serves it to Beck, who is surprised by the dish, saying it's perfect and looks too good. He grabs his chopsticks and starts eating. He tries a piece of the fish and is blown away by the flavor, feeling like he's floating in space, shouting and banging on the table. He says it's so good, even cries, and asks why someone who can cook such a delicious dish would make that awful stuff before. O'Keefe looks at his friend and asks why he's insulting Songwoo. The protagonist approaches Beck and tells him to think of it as just a hobby of his. He places the sauce on the table and asks Beck to try it. Beck tastes the sauce and cries even more, saying that the sauce is even better than the fish. The protagonist replies that he gets it and asks Beck not to spill the food. Songwoo heads back to the kitchen and says, "Now." O'Keefe looks and thinks that his turn has come. The protagonist puts the food in a bowl. O'Keefe looks at him and thinks he needs to find out why Songwoo makes such awful dishes. He closes his eyes, thinking he will sacrifice himself but will uncover the truth. He needs to ignore the taste and understand what's behind all of this. When he opens his eyes, he's surprised. The protagonist serves him the food and says that the taste might not be very good and smiling wishes O'Keefe good luck. He looks at the dish, which has an extremely unusual color and gets a bit nervous before eating. Beck looks at his friend's food and asks if that's really porridge. O'Keefe stares at the dish, wondering what he did wrong in life to deserve this, as the food looks quite strange. They ask if the protagonist put uranium in the food. Songwoo says that's very rude of them and assures them he didn't put anything like that in it. Beck asks if he added some energy drink, as the color is very strange and doesn't look edible. O'Keefe, still reluctant to eat, continues staring at the food. Beck asks if he's really going to eat it. O'Keefe picks up the spoon and stirs the food, thinking that the color, along with the flow of magical power, is unmistakable. This dish has the same effects as a healing potion. O'Keefe looks at the protagonist and wonders how he managed to prepare it so quickly, as not even professionals can do it as fast and effortlessly as Songwoo did. The two of them stare at the protagonist, who just smiles back. O'Keefe decides to ask if it really is, but the protagonist interrupts, asking him not to say anything. O'Keefe is confused, thinking Songwoo is asking him to keep quiet about it. He figures that, either way, he'll be healed if he eats it, so he decides to try a little first. He takes a spoonful and puts it in his mouth. Immediately, he feels a powerful healing sensation flowing through his body. He realizes he's being healed almost instantly, but the taste is absolutely terrible. He sticks out his tongue and asks why it feels like he's chewing on lead. Meanwhile, Beck is happily enjoying his meal. O'Keefe, trembling from the awful taste, thinks that if he wants to be healed, he needs to eat it all, no matter how bad it tastes. He musters up the courage and takes another spoonful, feeling like he's in hell, but thinks it's better to eat this than to die. Next to him, offering support, Beck is happily eating his delicious, succulent fish. 30 minutes later, O'Keefe is sitting there, looking dead inside, while Beck is beaming, saying everything was amazing. Smiling, he asks O'Keefe if his meal was good. When he looks at his friend, Beck is shocked, shouting and asking if O'Keefe is okay. O'Keefe thinks that his kidney is completely healed and his magical power is returning to normal. He thinks it's been so long since he felt this good. He stands up, and Beck, alarmed, asks what's going on. O'Keefe bows once again, thanking Sungwoo and saying he'll never forget this kindness. Beck looks at this, not understanding a damn thing. The protagonist says, "It was nothing." Beck, still utterly confused, looks at the two and asks what they're talking about and what that strange vibe is. No one answers, so he tells them both to go to hell and says he wants seconds. The protagonist begins to prepare more. A few hours later, with a pile of plates and almost dead from eating so much, Beck says he finally feels alive again. O'Keefe calls the protagonist and asks if he could help them fight the boss tomorrow if he really comes out of the portal. Sungwoo thinks for a moment, and just as he's about to speak, Beck interrupts and starts telling O'Keefe that he can't just ask for something like that. O'Keefe asks what Beck is talking about. Beck explains that the protagonist is a returned warrior and the strongest man they've ever seen in their lives. But that doesn't mean he's going to fight in their place. Beck emphasizes that Sungwoo probably has his own reasons. If he wanted to fight, he would have said something already. The fact that he's not getting involved is for their own good. Sungwoo observes this, surprised. Beck continues, saying that if he were to interfere in their work, things might be easier. But what would happen after that? They would lose the opportunity to grow stronger. O'Keefe watches him as Beck says all this. Beck starts to get excited and shouts that today's lesson is, we must get stronger and overcome difficulties on our own. Sungwoo applauds, surprised by all these words. O'Keefe, irritated, asks if Beck is joking. Beck doesn't understand why his friend is angry. O'Keefe tells him not to interfere. Beck, startled, asks what he did wrong this time. O'Keefe explains that if the protagonist joins them in the battle against the boss, the Hunter Association would find out, and then they'd have another member in the First Order. O'Keefe starts hitting back on the head, explaining that the rank 100 would drop to rank 101. He asks if that's not what Beck was worried about since he's in the top 100 of the rankings. Sungwoo comments that it makes more sense now if that's the reason. Beck starts laughing and says they've figured everything out. O'Keefe goes over to the protagonist and points to Beck, saying this is the kind of guy he is. Sungwoo asks O'Keefe to relax, saying he would turn Beck into an honest person. However, the protagonist pauses to think a bit and says that Beck isn't entirely wrong. He mentions that he's seen many kingdoms that relied on just one hero, but they all ended in ruins. The two start looking at the protagonist. O'Keefe says that if he thinks that way, then he won't waste any more of his time. He stands up and calls Beck to return to headquarters. Sungwoo tells them to come back whenever they want, because the food will be on the house. As they're leaving, the protagonist tells Beck that he should come back even more often. But Beck gets annoyed and says no, because he wouldn't like that. Outside on the street, Beck comments that 10 dishes were too much and that his stomach hurts. O'Keefe replies that he's very greedy for having eaten 10 dishes for free. Beck gets irritated and tells him to shut up, saying that O'Keefe ate that Chernobyl porridge. What kind of person eats that? O'Keefe just sighs, thinking that Beck doesn't know anything. They keep walking while O'Keefe reflects that one day, Beck will understand how lucky he was to have met that man named Sungwoo. The next day, the boss finally arrived and started the attack. A giant monster was in the city, and the two were on top of a building. O'Keefe looks and comments that the monster is really there. Beck notices that O'Keefe seems much more energetic than the last few times. He replies that he's really feeling great. The two get ready and jump together, shouting that it's showtime. The news starts broadcasting on TV, reporting that yesterday, Sector A, designated as a Rank A danger zone, was saved thanks to the duo of Beck from the First Order and O'Keefe from the Second Order. They will receive a Medal of Merit from the Korean government. The protagonist watched the report and was surprised by the performance of the two. The reporter mentions that, for the first time since his debut, Beck refused an interview. They were informed that it was due to severe stomach pain. The protagonist comments